There are more millionaires in Australia than most people realise. According to the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, Australia has one of the highest median wealth levels per adult on the planet. But not all of that wealth looks the same. Not all of it was built the same way. And not all of it will last. What actually separates the different types of wealthy Australians isn't just the size of the number. It's where it came from, how it's being managed, and whether it's growing or quietly disappearing. Let's go through every type. Old money in Australia is quieter than you'd expect. These are families whose wealth predates your grandparents, pastoral dynasties, early colonial land grants, mining families from the Western Australian goldfields, and established merchant clans who've been holding the same assets for a century or more. Names rarely make headlines. That's by design. Old money families don't talk about wealth, they preserve it. They invest in grazing properties, blue chip Australian shares, private schools, and long-standing family trusts structured to minimize estate taxes across generations. The conversation isn't about returns, it's about longevity. How do we hand more to the next generation than we received? That single question shapes every financial decision they make. You'll recognize old money not by what they spend, but by what they quietly own. New money is wealth built within a single lifetime. No inheritance, no family trust, just someone who started with nothing and built something. Australia has produced a remarkable number of these stories. Entrepreneurs who launched software companies out of Brisbane apartments, founders who sold tech platforms to American firms for hundreds of millions, and tradespeople who built construction empires from a single ute and a good reputation. New money tends to be more visible. The Point Piper waterfront, the Lamborghini and Touareg, the Instagram grid that doubles as a business card. This isn't necessarily arrogance. When you've spent 30 years eating 2-minute noodles and suddenly you can afford anything, the instinct to spend is human. The ones who convert new money into lasting wealth are the ones who eventually start thinking like old money, quietly, patiently, and with a 40-year horizon. If there is one category that defines Australian wealth culture more than any other, it's this one. Property wealth is embedded in the national psyche in a way that simply doesn't exist in most other countries. Australians have watched median house prices in Sydney climb past $1.4 million and in Melbourne sit above $900,000. And the lesson many drew from that was simple. Buy land, hold it, repeat. The property rich built their fortunes through patience and leverage. They understood negative gearing. They understood that Australian residential property has delivered consistent long-run capital growth, particularly in the major capital cities. Some started with a single investment property in their late 20s, used the rental income and equity to buy a second, and structured their way into a portfolio of 5, 6, or 8 properties over 2 decades. What separates the genuinely property rich from people who are just house price lucky is active portfolio management. Knowing when to sell, when to refinance, how to structure ownership through trusts or companies, and how to use depreciation schedules correctly. The ATO has very specific rules around all of this. The property rich know them cold. These are the people who built something and either still own it or sold it at the right moment. They're often invisible in public conversation because their wealth doesn't come with a famous product or a recognizable name. They own a commercial cleaning company that turns over $8 million a year. They own 3 medical centres in suburban Melbourne. They own a civil engineering firm that contracts to state governments. Australian small and medium business owners are quietly some of the wealthiest people in the country. When they sell, the proceeds are often substantial enough to fund retirement entirely, with money left over for the next generation. The small business CGT concessions available through the ATO can significantly reduce the tax on that sale, but only if the structure was set up correctly from the beginning. Most business owner wealth stories are also tax planning stories. You can't separate the two. These are people who built their wealth not by creating a business or buying property, but by putting money into financial markets and leaving it there. Australian shares through the ASX, global equities via ETFs like VGS or IVV, and superannuation funds that have quietly compounded for 3 decades. Warren Buffett's approach has Australian disciples, even if they don't know it. Someone who contributed the maximum concessional amount of $30,000 per year into super from age 30, invested it in a diversified growth option, and left it untouched until 65, would retire with a figure that surprises most people who run the numbers. The maths on long-term compounding inside super is genuinely extraordinary, particularly given the concessional tax rate of 15% versus the marginal rates most high earners face outside super. The investor rich don't look wealthy for most of their lives, their balance sheet is invisible. Then retirement arrives and the number becomes very hard to ignore. This one is uniquely Australian. The dividend imputation system means that Australian shareholders who hold ASX-listed companies receiving fully franked dividends get a credit for the corporate tax already paid. For retirees whose super funds are in pension phase and paying zero tax, those franking credits come back as a cash refund from the ATO. There are Australians in retirement who receive tens of thousands of dollars per year in franking credit refunds on top of their dividend income, simply by holding a concentrated portfolio of Australian blue chip shares inside their self-managed super fund. It's perfectly legal. It's the system working exactly as intended, and it has created a specific type of wealthy Australian retiree that exists nowhere else on Earth. Australia has produced a notable cohort of people who bought Bitcoin or Ethereum early enough to see their investment multiply at a scale that no traditional asset class ever delivered in such a short period. But some of these people had no investment background at all. They were 23 years old, read something on a forum, and put $5,000 into an asset that turned into $400,000. The challenge for the crypto rich is twofold. First, the ATO treats cryptocurrency as a capital gains tax event on disposal, which catches many people off guard. Second, the volatility that created the wealth can just as easily destroy it. Fortunes built in 18 months have evaporated in 6. The crypto rich, who actually stayed rich, are the ones who converted a meaningful portion into something more stable, property, shares, or simply cash, before the next cycle turned. Different from old money. The inheritor didn't grow up inside a dynasty. They received a large transfer of wealth, perhaps from a parent who built a business, sold a farm, or accumulated a significant superannuation balance. And that single event changed their financial trajectory permanently. Australian inheritance patterns are shifting. As the baby boomer generation ages and begins transferring an estimated $3.5 trillion in wealth to the next generation over the coming decades, more Australians will find themselves in this position. Research consistently shows that a significant proportion of inherited wealth is depleted within 2 to 3 years. Managing a large lump sum is a skill that money alone doesn't teach. The inheritors who build on what they receive treat it as a responsibility, not a windfall. This is the category that most people never see coming, including the people inside it. These are school teachers in Ballarat, mechanics in Geelong, public servants who spent 35 years in Canberra. They drove second-hand Corollas and packed their own lunch and maxed out their concessional super contributions every year without fail. They didn't have a dramatic wealth event, no business sale, no inheritance, no lucky share pick. They simply decided early that a meaningful percentage of every dollar they earned would be saved and invested, and they never stopped. After 3 decades of compounding, the result is a superannuation balance that sits comfortably above $1 million, a paid-off home, and a retirement that requires no compromise. The quiet rich are more common than any other type. They're just harder to notice, which is precisely the point. The wealthiest Australians don't all look the same. They didn't all take the same path, but nearly every category shares one thread: the decision to think long-term when everything around them encouraged the opposite. That decision, made early enough and consistently enough, is what separates the balance sheets. If this video gave you something useful, subscribe for more content like this every week. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next.